It began in the blue hour before sunrise, when the city still felt undecided about waking up. A bus hissed at the corner, releasing a tired sigh. A bakery 2 blocks down cracked open its doors and let a ribbon of warm yeast and cinnamon slip into the cold air. On the far end of Wellington Avenue, a boy and his mother crossed the street with an easy choreography learned over years, her keys out before they reached the service entrance, his left hand ready to catch the heavy door as it groaned open. Wellington Academy rested on a hill of old money and new glass. There were banners with Latin mottos, marble plaques bearing names of donors no one could remember, and a quad so perfectly trimmed it looked like silence made into grass. The school liked to say it prepared future leaders. The unspoken part was that most of those futures had already been purchased. Inside, Ms. Marilyn Carter and her son Noah stepped into the fluorescent hush of the custodial hallway. The lockers of steel and the bucket's soft roll on rubber floor made a small music of their own. "You take the 3rd floor today," Marilyn said, shrugging into a gray jacket that hid the damp from mop splashes. "Bathrooms first, then the science wing. I'll start with the cafeteria." Noah nodded. He was 12 and already tall, with a frame that looked like it wanted to be older than it was. He wore a uniform that didn't belong to the school gray shirt, worn sneakers, a badge with his mother's name clipped to his pocket, so teachers wouldn't mistake him for a trespasser. There was a small private relief in the early morning. No crowds rushing past, no eyes sliding over him like he was part of the building. "2 more rooms before the cafeteria," Marilyn reminded, with a smile that was soft but tired at the edges. "We're going to be fine today." They split. On the 3rd floor landing, Noah leaned his shoulder to push open the bathroom door. Steam ghosted the mirror. A faint map of small hands had drawn invisible suns and boats the afternoon before. He filled the caddy with paper towels, propped the door, and began to work. Routine and rhythm, the brush of the squeegee on tile, the circular polish of a stainless steel dispenser. He did the job with care his mother had taught him, without speeches. Work done well is its own signature. When he finished, he drifted toward the science wing. Through the glass, the labs looked like quiet ship's white counters, skeletal models, jars labeled in a precise teacher's script. He paused at a classroom where the board still carried marks from yesterday. Symbols leaned against one another, letters arguing politely, lines connecting dots like neighborhoods on a map. He knew enough to know he didn't know enough, which is the kind of knowing that lights a small fire inside certain children. He cleaned around the math. He always did. Sometimes, when he finished early, he would sit for a minute on a stool just inside the door and let his eyes be greedy. The board today wore an array of equations in black marker, like a city skyline drawn in numbers. There were pieces of linear algebra matrices like chessboards, a row of eigenvalues, a curious set of arrows that hinted at iteration, as if someone had attempted to explain a storm by listing the wind. Noah traced the lines in his head. He didn't have the formal words, not all of them, but he understood the feeling of them. Some patterns felt right, like a song that lands in your ear already memorized. Others felt wrong. When a pattern felt wrong, something in him tightened, as though a picture frame had been hung slightly crooked, and the world wouldn't balance until he adjusted it. Downstairs, the school was being polished for a visit. There would be silver trays with coffee cups, cameras, and a row of administrators whose smiles would ache by noon. Today's guest was Graham Whitmore, a clean-jawed tech billionaire whose company, VectorMind AI, sold predictions to people who bought the future like it was a stock on a ticker. He was tall in the way that made suits look like they'd been designed around him. He gave speeches about genius and grit. He loved the word merit. Noah learned all that from hearing. Wellington had a way of telling its own story out loud, even to those who weren't meant to be part of it. By 8:30, the driveway outside filled with shiny black cars. A camera crew unpacked tripods, and 2 men in coats congregated over a tablet. Noah was on a stepladder, squeegeeing the last fingerprints from the main entrance glass. He saw the reflection of Whitmore approach before he turned to see him. The silver hair, easy smile, a walk that said he was used to doors opening 1 beat before he reached them. "Big day," a teacher whispered to another as they swept past. "Big donor," the other said. Noah climbed down, careful not to be in anybody's way. But to be invisible requires the collusion of everyone around you, and sometimes the world refuses to cooperate. The entourage passed, all suits and polished shoes. Whitmore's eyes slid across the hallway like a scanner and snagged, for a second, on the boy with the bucket. He didn't stop. But a quip floated over his shoulder, the kind rich men toss lightly, as if words have no weight. "Some kids are diamonds in the rough," he said. "The rest, well, someone has to keep the floors clean." It landed with a hush. The people around him laughed the faint laugh reserved for powerful men's jokes. Noah felt an old heat bloom at the base of his throat. He didn't look up. He had learned that dignity sometimes sounds like not replying. By 10 o'clock, the conference room had an after-party look half-empty cups, a scatter of napkins, a smear of lemon tart on a plate. The glass board was crowded with the remains of a technical demonstration. System diagrams, formulas, something about a competition to identify the next generation of problem solvers. The camera crew coiled wires. The administrators eased into a looser posture now that the first performance was over. Noah and Marilyn arrived with their caddy and quiet. Noah moved to the glass and, without thinking, cleared a space around the math so he could see it cleanly. He tilted his head. "You into math, kid?" The voice behind him was smooth and slightly amused. He turned. Whitmore stood alone now, holding a cup with the logo of a coffee place that only existed in neighborhoods with wordless wealth. There was a glint around his eyes that had charmed 1,000 investors. "Yes, sir," Noah said, because he was taught to be polite, and also because it was true. "Funny," Whitmore replied. "I figured you people were more into mops than math." Marilyn rose so quickly, her kneecap bumped the chair. "He didn't mean anything, sir. We're just finishing up." Whitmore smiled without warmth. "Relax. It's a joke." Then, as if the world were a stage he could light by pointing, he flipped a tablet in his hands and opened a problem, a page crowded with symbols and nested logic. "Tell you what. You seem interested. Solve this. 3 minutes. If you can do it, I'll eat my tie." The challenge had been an impulse, the kind of confidence trick that lets certain men test the world to confirm their position in it. Whitmore expected a stammer, a shrug, maybe a dropped tablet. He expected to create a small story he could retell on a future stage. The day he tested the janitor's kid and got a laugh. Noah took the tablet carefully. He didn't think about the circle of onlookers that had begun to form at the door. A consultant curious enough to linger, a cameraman who knew a moment when he saw one. He thought about the board he'd been studying all week, the way the numbers seemed to be reaching for a shape they couldn't quite hold. He let his eyes move. He recognized pieces, variables inside functions that changed their tempo with every pass, an update rule that nudged toward convergence, a penalty term that felt heavy in the wrong direction. The pattern was like a song with one note played just off key, again and again, until the melody steered itself away from the truth. He wrote. The stylus moved fast but clean, the way a hand moves when the brain is already a few steps ahead. He changed the weighting, re-indexed the sequence of updates, and added a condition that would force the system to look again where it wanted to look away. He checked the stability of his revision with a tiny test, something like flipping a switch in his head and watching a set of lights blink into a different order. He stopped. 2 minutes had not yet crawled to 3. Done, he said. Whitmore laughed, because the moment required it of him. He took the tablet, glanced with the causal authority of a man accustomed to glancing, then narrowed his eyes. He didn't understand every line of what he was reading. He understood enough to know he was not ready to mock it. Let me see that, the consultant murmured, stepping forward with that peculiar sensitivity experts have when they sense they might be witnessing something they will later claim to have witnessed more closely. He read. His jaw shifted as if his mouth were quietly solving a separate problem. How to speak when stunned. This is correct, he said softly. He found a structural inconsistency. Inconsistency, Whitmore repeated, like a man tasting a foreign word. In the update rule, the consultant said, pointing, then tapping another line. And here. You've been pushing the system away from outliers early, instead of letting it learn their edges. If he's right, and he is, your model underweights certain signals. In finance, that kind of underweighting has a habit of disguising risk as momentum. The air changed. News crews, even when paid to be kind, are allergic to silence. This one went still. The administrators stood with the brittle smiles of people caught in an elevator when the music stops. Whitmore said nothing. From the hallway, Harold Green, Wellington's director, stepped in. He was a tall man with a body softened by years of polite dinners, and eyes that could be stern or kind, depending on the kind of truth they were being asked to recognize. Son, he said to Noah, careful not to crowd him. Do you study these formulas when you clean? Noah glanced at his mother. Marilyn's hand rose and fell. Stay polite. Tell the truth. I look at them, he said. Sometimes they make sense. Sometimes they don't. I try to see why Green's gaze flicked toward Whitmore. Ladies and gentlemen, he said to the room, but also to the world if it wanted to listen. We have just watched a child, without a desk, correct a system grown men built with budgets. He stepped closer to Noah. What's your name, son? Noah Carter. Mr. Carter, Green said, because names deserve respect. You have an extraordinary mind. There are moments when the air in a room becomes conductive, when the space between people feels like it could carry a charge if only someone would name what is happening. This was such a moment. Whitmore placed the tablet down like it had gone hot in his hand. We need to go, someone in his entourage said. Yes, Whitmore agreed, though it sounded like no to himself. He left without a line to the camera. The doors closed behind him with the hush of expensive hinges. By mid-afternoon, phones at VectorMind were singing. The firm's core projection suite, which their clients used to estimate quarterly growth and risk exposure, had leaned optimistic for months. Reported growth looked like a clean curve rising against clouds. The market loves such curves. If the boys' correction held in the full system, that curve would bend. Money notices bends. Whitmore stared at a wall of glass in his corner office while executives described the potential fallout with words like restate, and material discrepancy. There was a trembling in his chest he would not name as fear. In his mind, he kept seeing a small, steady hand moving across a screen with a confidence untouched by doubt. When the hand belonged to a child, it did not diminish the power of what it did. It multiplied it. But this story does not belong to boardrooms. It belongs to a small office at the back of a grand school where Harold Green asked Marilyn Carter to sit and offered her water she was too polite to accept. "Mrs. Carter," he said, "I would like to offer Noah a place at Wellington." He paused, as if measuring a river he was about to ask her to cross. "A full scholarship, books, tutors, the works." Marilyn's mouth opened and closed. When she finally found her voice, it held a lifetime of budgeting and calculating groceries by the ounce. "We can't afford—" "It would cost you nothing," Green said. "It is the school's honor." Marilyn looked at Noah. His face was calm, but his eyes had that lit room in them. She had seen that light when he was younger and disassembled a clock to watch time breathe. She had seen it when he learned to make soup from scratch after a double shift and told her the onions wanted patience. "You sure?" she whispered. Noah nodded once. "I just want to learn." Green extended his hand and shook Noah's with an adult's solemnity. "Then let's begin." Whitmore returned near dusk, stripped of entourage and his usual brightness. He asked to see them, not as investor or savior, but as a man who needed to say something that could not be said by email. In the office, he remained standing, not out of performance, but because his body felt too restless to earn the chair. "Mrs. Carter," he began, eyes steady. "Noah, I came to apologize. This morning I was arrogant and unkind. What you did exposed a flaw in our system and in me." He removed his watch with a small fumbling, like a man unused to undressing in front of strangers. It gleamed, heavy and private. He set it on the desk. "This meant something to me once," he said. "Today it means less. True value isn't measured in metal." He tapped his temple, then his chest. "It's measured here." Noah looked at the watch and felt a mix of curiosity and pity no child should feel toward an adult. "I don't want your watch," he said. He said it without a sting. "I just want to learn." Whitmore swallowed. "Then I'll make sure you can," he said. To Green, he added, "Whatever the school needs to support him, consider it done." It sounded like a pledge to another man and to himself. The next morning, Wellington Academy discovered how quickly a story reshapes a place. Students gathered in 3s and 5s, the way birds collect on telephone wires before a storm. They spoke his name in different tones, wonder, envy, relief, because some children need to know that rules can be bent by brilliance even when the rules feel solid as the floor. A few voices, old with a cruelty they borrowed from adults, added a different tone. The world does not correct itself in a day. Noah arrived wearing a navy blazer one size too big. The sleeves climbed his wrists like the sea taking shore. The name N. Carter appeared stitched on a backpack that smelled like fresh plastic. Marilyn walked him to the gate as if it were the mouth of the ocean. She let him go with a hand that hovered for a second behind his back and then fell. His schedule carried classes he had never formally taken, but already half appreciated. In his first algebra session, the teacher, Mr. Patel, greeted him with a grin and a chalk stub. "I hear you're the reason I slept badly last night," he said. "Please take a seat and ruin my pride." A girl 3 rows back whispered, "That's him." And a boy beside her whispered back, "No way." and then their eyes slid away when he looked up. He placed his notebook on his desk and flipped to a blank page. It felt like stepping onto a stage after spending years in the wings, having memorized the lines by listening. At lunch, a boy with a halo of tight curls set his tray opposite Noah's. "I'm Miles," he said, as if it were important to be first with friendship. "Everybody thinks you're scary. I think you just see things." They spent lunch not speaking much, which is how certain boys become friends, by sharing quiet in a loud place. The school scheduled an assembly a week later under a banner someone in the communications office titled, "Hidden Genius, What We Fail to See." Harold Green took the stage and told the story as carefully as a man handling a fragile heirloom. He did not say charity. He did not say luck. He said discernment and opportunity. Then he invited Noah to the microphone. Noah stepped forward as if the stage might be slippery. He gripped the sides of the podium and looked out at faces waiting to feel something. "I'm not good at talking," he began, which made them lean in. "But I know what it feels like when people look through you like you're made of glass. I used to think that if I cleaned well enough, maybe they'd see me. Today I learned that sometimes what people need is not a cleaner floor. It's a reason to look down and notice who's been keeping them from slipping." Silence, then a praise that rose slowly and filled the auditorium with a sound strangely like relief. Marilyn stood in the aisle with her hands over her mouth and cried in a way that taught the people around her what honor looks like on a human face. At VectorMind, the algorithm adjusted. The curve bent like an honest back. Investors made different calls. The board held a meeting where words like oversight and ethics appeared more times than at any previous gathering. Someone, not the PR team, suggested that truth was cheaper in the long run than spin. Graham listened. He had lived large enough to believe he'd be remembered, and suddenly the shape of that memory felt negotiable. He wrote a letter not dictated, not typed by an assistant. A hand-cramped, slightly messy letter. "You saw what we missed," he wrote. "Not to embarrass us, but because seeing is what your mind does. Keep it. Keep going." He included a certificate, a promise of full tuition to any university Noah chose when the time came. It was both restitution and investment. Noah folded the letter and slid it into the back of his notebook. He did not speak about it much. When Miles asked what the letter said, he shrugged. "That I see things," he answered. "You do," Miles replied. Not kindly, just true. Weeks planted themselves into months. Noah's days found a new rhythm. Morning classes, afternoons in the library where he explained probability with jelly beans, evenings where he still sometimes met his mother after her shift and carried the heavier bags because a son's strength is a small gift he can give back. On Saturdays, he volunteered for the school's peer tutoring program, not because it looked good on paper, but because he remembered how it felt to be on the outside of a glass looking in. One crisp afternoon, he sat alone in an empty classroom, with the winter sun stretching long across the floor. On the board, he wrote a line of symbols that had been teasing his mind for weeks, something about error correction that felt less like math and more like humility. He stepped back, thought, then erased it. There was comfort in the disappearance. Not everything solved needs applause. Some solutions are private agreements between a child and the part of the world that listens. Graham visited again in spring, not to speak on stage, but to sit in the back of a classroom and watch a boy reframe a question until the class learned to ask better ones. After, he waited in the hallway with his hands in his pockets. "I was wrong," he said, as Noah approached. "I know," Noah replied, without cruelty. "Thank you for proving it." Noah nodded. "I didn't do it for you." "I know," Graham said again, and the repetition was not a weakness, but a kind of prayer. That summer, the school ran an outreach program inviting neighborhood kids to tinker with robotics and puzzle solving in the lab that used to be locked on weekends. Noah volunteered to lead a small group of 8-year-olds. He made circuits out of paper clips and sticky tape. He told them to ask their questions out loud even if their voices shook. A girl named Lena, quiet and bright, followed him step for step. "I like how wires make light," she said. "Me too," he answered, and in that small exchange, a pipeline opened where previously there had only been a wall. Not every day was clean. There were still children who snickered, still a teacher whose expectations came with edges, still adults who wanted his story to be about them. He made mistakes in geometry and learned to own them. He rushed through proofs and had to circle back. When he faltered, Miles said, "You're human, thank God." And Noah learned that a fall is sometimes just a chance to feel the floor you've been standing on. In the fall of his 13th year, he entered a statewide math competition, not as a prodigy packaged by donors, but as a kid who liked to think. He reached the final round and faced a problem steeped in combinatorics. He did not win. He placed second. The boy who placed first shook his hand, eyes bright with the pure joy of being challenged. A reporter asked Noah how it felt to lose. Noah grinned. "It felt like learning," he said, and walked off to find his mom, who hugged him as if first place were a private thing between them that no medal could measure. On a rainy Tuesday, a small ceremony took place in the cafeteria where Marilyn once mopped. The school named a scholarship fund for students who work on campus quiet money from quiet donors carved out to notice what the old system failed to see. It wasn't a building. It was a door. Graham attended without a speech. He stood beside Marilyn and listened. "I used to think power meant people listened because you were loud," he said to her afterward. "Your son showed me that, sometimes. It means you listen because somebody soft said something true." Marilyn smiled. It was the kind of smile that stays on a mother's face while she's washing dishes later, because it's not borrowed from anyone else's approval. It belongs to the knowledge that she had kept a boy alive and honest long enough for the world to meet him. Years would unspool. The world would keep being itself unfair in familiar ways, generous in surprising ones. Wellington Academy would still hold galas where the ice sculptures sweated under spotlights, and children would keep arriving in black SUVs with headphones like invisible helmets. But also, on certain mornings, a kid whose name no one knew yet would watch a board and feel something click. Someone, maybe a teacher, maybe a director, maybe another student would point and say, "You, come here," and a path would open that wasn't there the day before. On one of the last days of that first year, Noah walked the hallway with his mother after her shift. The custodial cart rattled. They moved at the same pace like a long-practiced duet. "You tired?" Marilyn asked. "Little," he said. "You?" "Little," she echoed. They stood at the glass doors where he'd once wiped away fingerprints that never stayed away. Outside, the city had finally decided to be evening. "You remember when you were a baby and you liked to take apart the TV remote?" she said. "I remember you telling me to put it back together before your show came on." "You always did," she said, smiling. "Not perfect, but better." "Better," he repeated. He reached for the door, and together they walked out into a world that had not changed nearly enough. And yet, because two people had insisted on a different kind of seeing, had changed just a little. If you've lived long enough, you know the world can be noisy with titles and trophies, with the kind of self-confidence that arrives in a shiny car and leaves with a shiny speech. But here's the quieter truth this story carries. The most important intelligence is not loud. It's the kind that listens, notices, and keeps showing up, like a mother who works nights so a boy can keep a small light on inside, or like a child who studies the chalk dust others leave behind and finds the flaw no one else saw. Many of us were raised to believe opportunity knocks. Sometimes it whispers. Sometimes it's mopping a floor at dawn. If you are a grandparent, a neighbor, a retired teacher, or simply someone who remembers being overlooked, you carry a key most systems forgot: the power to notice. Look for the hidden genius in your family, your church, your block. Invite it forward. And if you are in a position of authority, practice the oldest form of leadership we have. Apologize when you're wrong, set things right, and turn your privilege into someone else's open door. If this story stirred a memory or gave you hope, share your thoughts in the comments. Tell us who first noticed you or whom you're choosing to notice now. And if you'd like more human-centered stories that honor working hands and brave hearts, please subscribe and tap the bell. Your presence here helps us keep telling them.